Trip 16. This time, because I had read on the internet about that. If you take too much salvia that you can sleepwalk, which I did, I decided to take less to stop this from happening, but the effects were that I found myself again in the garden with a true sense of belonging, and I could also sense and hear the neighbors chanting behind me up and down the street. Unfortunately, the trip was only a fleeting glimpse, because the dose was not strong enough to sustain it. So I have decided that I will have to go back to the original dose to get the full effects and length regardless of whether I sleepwalk or not. I must stipulate that I had Anita in the flat keeping an ever watchful eye over me, ready to break my spell and bring me back into consciousness if I should do myself harm, or try to walk outside of our flat in the external corridor. Basically, she was performing the act, or doing the job of ground control. Trip 17. I found myself in the garden again, and I was being drawn toward a pathway at the side of the house. I could hear, like before, a chorus of people chanting, but I could not make any sense out of their words. It was then that I saw out of the corner of my eye an outline of people at both sides of me, all walking up their own garden paths in the row of houses simultaneously. I turned my head first to the right, and I could see them clearly, and then I turned to the left, and I could see them in that direction too. I got right up to the path at the side of the house, and then I came out of the trip. The conclusion. In the trips, I have found myself in a garden facing a house, and people from my neighborhood were at the back of me out of sight, but I could feel them there and hear them chanting together. I think I was in the garden on my back on a sheet, because in reality, I was in my bed. I think, although I cannot be sure, that people who have near-death experiences could release the same chemical, and they experience similar things, like the family and friends watching, comforting and greeting them. You feel exposed, but it feels like you really belong there, and the people who are there really know you, and somehow there is an empathic link. It could also be a birth trauma, especially the cord being tugged around the waist. That could be a symbolic representation of an umbilical cord, the garden, the womb, the pathway and doorway leading to the house, the birth canal and the home, with the expectant mother tugging me toward her. The friends of the family, and the sense of belonging could also be a birth trauma, coming up symbolically too, as being pulled from the salvia world to the home, in the street, could be significant of a baby being born. The expectant friends and relatives could be the congregation that waits, and then welcomes the newborn baby into this world. The child would feel and hear their presence, and maybe even empathically feel their love. But I do not understand the congregation's astonishment of the baby wanting to leave their world, which is not this world unless it is the infant's far memory, and the congregation are assembled in the spirit world as the child leaves it to become a newborn baby in this realm. The people are not in this world expecting you to be born. They simply must be in the spirit world watching you leave for this world, if all the evidence from the salvia experience is taken into account. This could be evidence of life before the mortal coil, giving proof of the spirit world. On the other hand, if you imagine a building in a street with a small, but adequate front garden stretched out before it, then that is a clear picture of what I was trying to elucidate here. The house is your body and the garden is your mind that stretches out from the body and meets with the street outside. In the roof of the house there is an attic with a small window looking out at the garden and the street below, the attic being your soul with your spiritual perspective of your own reality. Now, if you take that metaphor and see it as it truly is, then you have your soul, body, mind and your preordained destiny. On you go, living your life, picking up knowledge and wisdom until your house becomes derelict and it has to be demolished. However, do not despair, for a new house is built after they have knocked down the old one, but not before the soul has gone to the light to put all its life's wisdom into the spiritual mix. Upon reflection, I thought to myself, is that what my salvia trips were trying to show me? The house, garden and the street were probably recurring, because they were a metaphor that were to be grasped and understood esoterically, and perhaps all my trips are metaphors for life, the beyond and all that stuff. Perhaps, when I was being summoned into the house from the garden in what I thought was a birth trauma, could have been a metaphor for my mind exiting the garden to merge with my higher self in the attic upon my eventual physical death. The people who were present witnessing my birth, that I had surmised were my welcoming party, that would be there at my crossing greeting me into the afterlife, and if so that would make my trips shamanic messages, and not just vivid dreams summed up by my drug-fueled psychology. I will leave my salvia experiences here for a while, because I think that I have taken them as far as I can take them for now, because I keep ending up in the same garden, and I am sure that I will bore you to death, if all that I have are these experiences to write about. DMT. The other day, Georgina and her friend turned up, and they brought with them some DMT, which they shared with me, so that I could experience it, and I was grateful for their generosity and warm, loving natures. I had approximately 5 trips throughout the night, and I have written them down collectively, because they were more or less identical experiences, they only differed in depth and time. I hope that you can enjoy and absorb them through my literature. I administered the powder through a crack cocaine pipe that was like a glass balloon at one end, where you put the DMT with a tube leading from the bowl and extending to the other end to the mouth where you inhaled the vapor. The lighter heated the bowl on the outside and underneath, so it did not subject the powder to an actual flame. It was difficult to smoke, and it took a lot of breath to inhale the vapor. I took in the smoke, and then gave the pipe back to my friend after the consumption of the drug. I had a spoonful of honey, because the bitter taste in my mouth, and lay down comfortably on the sofa, with some soft relaxing ambient music playing in the background for set and setting. And then I experienced the trip. Trips 1 to 5. I found myself being gently pulled down a kaleidoscopic tunnel, where there were small intricate geometric shapes, patterns and electric psychedelic colors all around me. Numbers and letters would flitter in and out of existence. I felt electric showers penetrate my mind and body physically. Then after a while I reached a psychedelic, neon-woven, jewel-encrusted, translucent golden, Gothic gate, like the gate that you used to have on the 3-pence coin that you had in the UK before decimalization. I passed through the gate, and when I did I was turned around, and I was looking at it from the opposite direction. After that, I suddenly began to rotate around it. And it was like being on a roundabout in a children's playground as I saw a 360-degree perspective of the Gothic castle gate. Then I began to see archetypal figures, such as hazy illuminated ethereal light beings and biblical angels in full-body form standing next to me. I saw the face of a clown on a screen on the center of the gate. I reveled in the experience, and after a time the trip began to dim, or fade from view, and I opened my eyes as the experience was at its end. Upon reflection, I think that I traveled down a kaleidoscopic, geometric psychedelic tunnel, and then reached a borderline in the form of a gate, which I subsequently passed through. Next, the light beings and biblical angels were observing, but not invading my personal space, or interfering with my journey. At the other side of the gate a force turned me around, so that I would travel no further, and then I was rotated around the gate. I wonder if it was not fueled by DMT, if it could have been a classic case of a near-death experience. It certainly seems that way to me. I think that I did not travel beyond the gate into the light, and the ethereal beings did not come to my aid, because it just simply was not my time to die. They say that you release the same brain chemicals of DMT when you are born into this world, and again when you cross over at death into the light. So did I bring on a psychedelic near-death experience? The mind boggles. Those experiences were fantastic, but I do not know whether I am going to experience them again, because I felt like I had reached its boundaries, and that I could go no further. However, it was a gentle and uplifting set of experiences, and it sure made a fun evening as we all described and laughed about our individual trips that we had experienced together. Last night, several weeks after the experience, I had a dream that I believe was either a flashback to my DMT experience, or was induced because of its profundity. I got in a lift where I went to the top floor, got out, and then I entered a spectacular garden. It was similar to the Land of Ounce in that it was very colorful. It had a few paths in different, but parallel directions that made the same way through the garden to a spectacular emerald city. I passed through a doorway that led to another lift. I got in and went up to the top floor. I left the lift and I found myself at a door to an office of which I knocked, then entered. There was a spatial tidy office inside with one desk and two chairs that were on opposite sides of the desk. I sat down on one chair, and there was an ethereal being in the guise of an old man sat opposite me. He looked like a cross between Santa Claus and an ancient Greek philosopher. His attire was a white robe like the ones that they used to wear in ancient Greece or Rome, and he began to interview me. Although I could not hear him, or what he was saying, I took it to be some kind of guidance, for I felt rejuvenated and elevated from the experience. After a time, I left the office, traversed through the beautiful garden, then I got back into the lift and suddenly I found myself on a warm, picturesque ambient tropical beach. After a time, I awoke from the dream, or experience, and it inspired me to do some research on the effects and after effects of the DMT experience. I researched the DMT, and it turns out that it is similar to psilocybin, that is the active chemical of the magic mushroom. They go on to say that it is apparent in many life forms, both plant and animal, of which the humans are only one. It activates or stimulates the pineal gland at the center of the brain, which usually only comes with birth and death. Apparently, there is a filter within our livers that stops the effects of DMT. Nonetheless, when inhaled, this bypasses the liver, and the effects can be experienced. Further, the Amazonian Indians have found a plant, which they say a spirit guided them to use, that they boil together from 1 to 4 days with it, that neutralizes the inhibitor, and they reach the altered states for up to 4 to 6 hours. They called it ayahuasca. They go on a special diet for several days leading up to it. Then they drink it at night like tea as the shamanic Indians chant, and either call up, or make a connection to spiritual entities, or guides to help, or add to the experience. On this note, it is important to say that with DMT, as with all psychedelics, it is imperative to have the correct set and setting to get the best results. Basically, a warm, safe, comfortable, friendly and quiet environment has been suggested to get the full beneficial effects from the experience. The effects can be had with meditation, it is said, and they point out the experiences of Buddha as he sat meditating under the Bodhi tree where he received enlightenment. Some people profess that consciousness is not derived from the brain as modern materialists proclaim. They believe that when the body dies, the mind dies along with it, but rather it could be like an aerial picking up consciousness. So with this in mind, they suggest that life transcends the corporeal, or rejoins spirit at death. Others suggest that the ruling governments tolerate alcohol, cigarettes and caffeine because they are focused on the material world, so they find it easier to be in control, whereas psychedelics operate within the internal or spiritual realms, and that, if it were legalized, that the governments of the world would be under threat from extinction. On the whole, the governments would fall with the knowledge that they would bring back and utilize. Either that, or science and spirit would merge, going hand in hand, and that this could be the next stage of evolution, so that there would be no place for a material government in this kind of spiritual and material world. The main messages that they bring back from their experiences are that they must deal with their inner demons, embrace community spirit, find a better connection with nature, and how we treat it and reconnect with spirit, or God. With the drug they seem to lack control of their senses, as they reach a higher state of awareness where they dissolve into everything, finding a unity with nature and the creative spiritual force. Then, they are spiritually advised by a female entity known as Mother Ayahuasca that gives them social, natural and spiritual wisdom that they are able to bring back with them and integrate it in their everyday lives and experiences. They do not see ayahuasca as a narcotic, but as a medicine that nature, or God, has generously provided. There are subtle beings in this higher dimension that are subtlety guiding us to come to terms with those four concepts that I wrote of above, and this reinforces their views that the effects of the drug has a healing and life-changing quality. To support this claim, when Western doctors use it with depression, anxiety and drug, or alcohol addiction, they state that it is totally effective at curing these ailments, and their subjects have gone on to live healthy, ordinary lives. Further, when doctors have given it to cancer patients, they see it as a penultimate step to life beyond life, so when they make the final voyage it will be less traumatic. They proclaim that DMT is like a window to this other higher realm of existence, where the user can only experience a glimpse of the trip. Whereas with ayahuasca, because of its depth, and the longer time period, you get a full-on experience, where you dissolve the ego, and experience interconnectedness to nature and spirit. I don't see myself jetting off to the Amazon to try ayahuasca, but I would not condemn, or criticize anyone who wished to do so. I wouldn't personally take it myself, because I hate purging from my orifices, per se. Last night, I visited Georgina's flat, and she had some DMT again, and she shared some with me. Apparently, the last time it was synthetic, whereas this time it was from an actual plant. I administered 4 doses throughout the course of the evening, and I ventured once more into an alternate higher dimension. Trips 6 to 10. After inhaling the smoke, I laid back and enjoyed the ride. I closed my eyes, and I immediately had a kaleidoscopic vision. I found myself traveling at the side of a building, and as I did I began to alternate between dimensions. I say traveled, because it seemed like that I was driving automatically, or being driven in some kind of invisible vehicle by an equally invisible chauffeur. I was moving at the side of the building, then I started to go up the walls, and I passed through them and I entered some spacious rooms that were on the inside. All the time this was happening I saw interdimensional beings flittering in and out of my view. They would appear in the distance, then disappear from view only to reappear right in front of my eyes. They looked like cartoon characters, although they were not like any that I have ever seen before. They appeared to be reptilians with jaws that resembled a crocodile or an alligator, and their bodies resembled bipedal lizard people, and they were enmeshed within the kaleidoscopic vision that stretched out before me like that of chameleons or octopuses that camouflaged themselves by taking on the appearance of the surrounding area to blend in. Their jaws would open up, then snap shut, and they also appeared to be smiling as they turned their faces to look at me, and it felt like that they were trying to communicate. Although I could not hear what it was that they were trying to say because the trips were not audible. The only sound that I could hear was a machine-like humming that had been apparent throughout the whole of the trips in the background. I then journeyed down a heavy built-up neon-lit street like you would find in London or New York City, and the buildings resembled warehouses of some kind. Again, I traveled along up and through the buildings, and while I did, I kept getting the beings flitter in and out of my vision, both far away, then close up. The trips after a time began to fade, so I opened my eyes, and I was back in the room. Magic mushrooms. I was recently given some Mexican magic mushrooms from a close friend, not the philosopher's stones that I took at the Lamb gig. I took 8 of them, and I saw geometric shapes and bright vivid colors, and I was totally aware of my aura, and the effects were like that of DMT, only I was overwhelmed with the feeling of nausea. The next trip I took 4, and I got the shapes and colors like before when I closed my eyes, but they were less vivid, and again I could feel my aura permeate my body, but less than I had before with 8. Again, I was nauseous, and I could feel serotonin and oxytocin get released as I felt the need to chat and express my emotions, hug and adore everybody that were present, and it was like taking ecstasy tablets. The next trip I took 2, and they were perfect, no nausea, and it felt like LSD. I could feel my aura, and my meridians osculating and permeating my whole being, and the duration was approximately 2 hours. Then I smoked some marijuana to chill out, and it was lovely. I leave you now, and I would like to thank you for reading my entries, and I hope that you have a long, loving and joyful, prosperous life. Many thanks. Lewes.
Reality is a nice place.